Excelente. How you doing, man?
Doing great.
Your
I like
name
your
is?
shirt, man. What's it say?
Damn Funk.
Da-
This is a young funk musician from LA that we're going to be interviewing.
Oh, all right.
His party is a funk party we're going
Oh, that's
to.
the party you're talking about.
Yeah. So he's one of our. So he's only like 30 something, and he's trying to be a funk musician now.
The bus is way ahead of him, right?
Yes.
He's running fast, trying to catch up.
Why do you think? I mean, do you think? I mean, What is? Let me start with this one. Very simple. Someone said to you, "What is funk?" What would you say?
If somebody said to me, "What is funk?" Here's a problem with music in general, but funk in particular, is that there are some things that words don't do it justice. Like you could try to describe funk, but it's going to cheapen it somehow. You know what I mean? Because, somebody said, if you could explain it in words, you wouldn't have to play it, Funk is something that when you hear it, you instantly know, oh, that's funky, right? You got to really hear it. I could start talking about interplay between the instruments and stuff, but if I go, you go, okay, yeah, that's funk, right? Whatever that is, however you describe that, that's what it is. But the music really is the only thing that really does it justice. The only way to really understand it is to feel it. And sometimes, just listening to it doesn't do it. If you're in, the environment, when we grew up, man, if you were at a block party and somebody put on a funky song, then you understand it, because it's not just the notes. It's like the whole community. Just watching people dance to it, watching people react to it. That's what it was really, the whole experience, man, that is what funk was all about. I meet people now, man, who, they want to be funk musicians, but they were never at a funk club. They were never in that environment. They didn't know how people move, how people dance. They only watching videos, So it's hard to explain, man. The best thing to do is if you can find a funk party, go to one, man, and see what that music does for you, and then you'll understand.
What artists for you define what funk is?
For me, the artists that define funk, for me, I'm a little bit more broad than a lot of people, you know what I mean? For me, Louis Jordan back in the 30s and the 40s was funky. And some of the stuff that Miles Davis did and Lee Morgan did in the 50s and 60s is funky. And then James Brown kind of started what we all imagine or what we all kind of consider to be funk now.
I want to go back on this, because the origins of the word funk, and funky, and music seem to go back to jazz in the 50s.
Yeah, funk didn't start. I mean, that word didn't start in the 60s. It was earlier than that. I mean, I'm sure black folks have been using the word funk for a long time. You know what I mean? Because we are the ones who turn things that have a negative connotation into something positive. You know what I mean? So I think people were saying that's funky, nasty. That's a good thing since way back.
People talk about I remember I read the organ trios.
Yes.
That was.
Now, if you want to hear funk before, or at least during James Brown, but probably a little bit before, listen to the Jimmy Smith organ trios. They were the funky bands. They played jazz, but they used a lot of blues in it. They weren't afraid of the blues. A lot of the jazz musicians, after 1950, they started kind of disowning the blues a little bit, some of them, because as blacks, we were fighting for respect. We were fighting in this kind of white American society for respect, and we were trying to distance ourselves from anything that was earthy, distance ourselves from anything that was kind of quote-unquote unsophisticated, right? So a lot of black musicians started going, I don't play the blues, I stay away from the blues. They would avoid it, And there was another set of jazz musicians who didn't avoid it, and they were the funky musicians, So you had guys like Jimmy Smith. You had a lot of tenor saxophone players coming out of Texas. Houston Person was one of them, you know what I mean, who were like, nah, I'm playing funky. Lou Donaldson was very funky for a while. And in the 60s, some of the jazz musicians started going, you know what, there's nothing wrong with the blues. There's nothing wrong with funk. You know what I mean? Lee Morgan had a song called Sidewinder, which was funky, but it was like a boogaloo funk. So it's basically, you did your little boogaloo dance, right? There was that. There was Mongo Santa Maria, who had a funky kind of Afro-Cuban thing. It was all mixed together. The Afro-Cuban tradition was important because that was some of the first music that we heard where the bass played the same thing over and over again. The bass would go. Over and over again. And then people would start to get, wow, that sounds good, man. It doesn't change. And it creates a trance, a hypnotic kind of thing. In jazz, up to then, the bass was like, the bass was moving, right? But in this Afro-Cuban thing, all of a sudden, man, hey, man, just have that bass do the same thing. Then James Brown in the 60s, he kind of keyed in on it. I don't know if he heard it or if he just felt it on his own, but he had the bass player say, hey, man, just do the same thing over again. Over and over again, man. And it became like a trademark of funk, that the way the music grows is to don't do anything different, right? With all other kinds of styles of music, in order to make the music grow, you started getting louder, you started playing busier, you started trying to create more energy, right? With funk, the way you did that was don't change it. You went. It got bigger. Just the fact that you didn't change it created this thing that made it like snowball, like a snowball rolling down the hill, you know what I mean? So for me, that's all funk, right? From the 50s, 40s, 50s, all the way through. Then there was that culture of funk, you know, that happened like in the 70s, that most people who weren't around, that's the thing that they attached to it, you know, when funk became not just a music, but a culture. So that's the platform shoes, the afro, the Sir Nose, the Mothership, all that stuff, which was cool. I mean, that's when funk got so big, it became a lifestyle, not just a music. But for me, funk is bigger than that too. You know what I mean? Funk is in everything you hear. It's in that music from the 40s I was talking about. It's in hip hop. Anything that when the hip hop, when it's really banging, that's because underneath it all, underneath the rhymes and the raps, there's funk. You know, when you hear. That's funk. That's funk underneath there, right? That's just funk. That's just funk. But the thing that changes in the hip hop is the way the drums sound and the fact that they're rhyming on top of it, right? But funk is at the bottom of it.
Funk is like would you say funk is either the father or the cousin of hip hop?
No, man, funk is the father. It ain't the cousin. Because the first hip hop records, right? The first one I remember was. Right? That's a funk bass line. That's a straight. Whenever you hear the bass line play 3 notes in a row, that's funk. That's just sitting it down, right? That's funk. And that was a song by Chic called Good Times, right? That Bernard Edwards played the bass on. And that song was a disco song. Everybody kind of considered disco. But funk was at the bottom of disco, right? All this music, man, all the black music that came after funk music still has as at its base funk music. You know, it's even when you don't know you're listening to funk. Like there was the you know the 60s, mid 60s funk. Then you had late 60s funk. You had early 70s. Right? Early 70s, mid 70s, you had you had late 70s. And all people would describe what I'm playing, all these different bass lines, as different styles. But it's all funk bass. It's all funk bass. And then that's all funk. That's the 80s. We're already in the 80s, right? And we're still funky, right? And then what is in the club. It's all in the basis of it. It's funk. They change the way the record sounds. They'll change the way the drums sound. But at the core of it, still funky.
Let me ask you about let's talk about jazz a little bit. When Sly, particularly Sly, and really started when he introduced the Family Stone.
Hmm.
It seems like Miles, who you knew very well, was very affected by what Sly did in particular, and it ended up changing jazz.
Well, you know, Miles Davis, when he first came to New York, 19 years old, he was fascinated by bebop. That's what drew him to New York from St. Louis. And for him, bebop was the hippest music because it was sophisticated. And it was the music of the times, meaning everybody was dancing, everybody was talking in this bebop lingo. You know, it was really hip. It was really current, and that's always what excited him about music. So he went through the 40s playing bebop, and then he started playing a little bit more bluesy in the 50s. They call it hard bop, you know. And he went through the 60s where he started to get more kind of abstract with his music. And I think towards the end of the 60s, he started looking around and realizing that he was no longer connected. You know what I mean? He had a huge following. There are people who loved him, but mainstream America, and maybe even more particularly mainstream Black America, I think Miles started to feel a distance between himself and that community. And he's like, man, he didn't feel comfortable being that far, being that distant from his community. So he started checking out what was happening. James Brown and Sly, right? And Sly really, I think he really affected Miles, you know? And Miles said, I want to get some of that. I want to reconnect. And I really moved. And it wasn't just Miles. Everybody was affected by Sly. But Miles was so affected that it changed his music. I mean, it created this huge chasm in Miles Davis's career. You have like pre-1969 and post-1969. And the post-1969, I might be off by a year or two, but the post-1969 is a direct result of funk music and Sly. Because he changed, all of a sudden, Miles changed the way he dressed, right? He didn't just change his music, he changed the way he dressed, he changed his attitude, right? He started plugging his trumpet into a wah-wah pedal, which is a device that usually you plug a guitar into, so it goes wow, wow. Miles plugged his trumpet into a wah-wah pedal. He said, I want to get some of this. And he created this album, man, called Bitches Brew, which it was like a gold record. It was like really rare in jazz. He had a gold record off of Bitches Brew, which is, you know, and if you listen to Bitches Brew now, it sounds very experimental. Like, they weren't quite, locked in on what they wanted to do, but it's certainly the spirit shined through, and it was really a big record. I mean, people really connected to it. Like I said, it was a gold record, man, and jazz, that was unheard of. So it really kind of Sly was kind of like the line of demarcation for jazz as well.
Let's just since we're talking about Miles, you work with Miles later. It's interesting because you work with him on, Tutu is one of my favorite albums, and it's interesting because that's then Miles adapting to a new kind of funk.
Right. Well, the thing here, let me
Sure.
Yeah. And he played his funky stuff that he used to play in 1955. He left a little bit more space so these other instruments could shine through, but it felt very comfortable. Herbie Hancock was the same way, right? Herbie Hancock was a jazz musician, man. He played straight jazz. He decided not soon after Miles that he wanted to get funky too. He came up with this group, the Headhunters, and he fell right in because the great musicians, if they know their music, they know their black cultural music, the funk and the jazz is not that much of a difference. It's harmonically it's different, but rhythmically you fall right in there,
Interesting thing that as we talk to a lot of funk musicians, first generation, like higher players, but even Tume, there's so many of these guys, their fathers or they're either were jazz musicians or were jazz heads.
Yes.
So it's not like funk is this departure.
No, funk is not a departure. In the same way that when hip-hop came, hip-hop basically stripped R&B down of all the things that R&B had become. R&B had become really big. R&B had orchestras, Barry White. R&B had 15 guys in the group, 15 instruments, and then an orchestra on top of that, right? R&B was really big, and hip-hop came and said, okay, we're getting a little too big. We need to strip this down to the two most important elements in African American music, which is the voice and the beat, right? Well, with jazz, go back a generation and a half, it was like, you know what, let's break this back down because we've gone pretty much as far as we can go. boom, funk broke it down. And some of the jazz musicians got left out there in outer space. And some of them said, you know what, yeah, it is time to break it down. And they got funky, you know what I mean? And now we built it up, and 10 years later, hip-hop felt like it had to do the same thing.
So when you did Tutu, because talk about what that album meant in terms of, because it's funk, but it's the technology is there. It's a different. The technology changes how the music sounds. So.
At the basis of Tutu, yeah, is funk music, but it was 1985, 1986, and at that point, technology was really starting to kind of make its effect known on music, you know. And I know I was using a drum machine, I was using samplers that had voices in it. You know, technology really was a player in the music, so a lot of people might not even recognize it as funk music, you know, until I break it down. But you know, like on Tutu, the bass line goes. Funk music, right? But you can't hear it because the technology is distracting your ear. You know what I mean? But it's still at the core.
You can feel it.
Yeah, it's what draws you in rhythmically. You know, and then you say, oh wow, that's trippy, or whatever your reaction to the music is. So, you know, it's funny because, you know, if you're a 50-year-old now, right? The music from 50 years ago, you can't listen to because it's so different from the music of your times, right? But people who are going to be 50 in 10 years, right? They'll be able to listen to 50-year-old music because funk from 1969, that music, the core of the music hasn't changed. There are people, young people who listen to hip hop. You put a funky record, they're like, oh yeah, I like this old school. You know what I mean? You put an old Lee Morgan record on for some people, man. They're like, I don't know how to move to this music because it's different. You know what I mean? I don't have any point of reference. But man, once funk started, man, it's carried through. All different names for it, all different styles, but at the core of it, it's still funk. It's like the through line.
I want to talk a little bit about because we had a conversation about this a few years ago about what. Okay, I'll put it this way. One of the things I found in doing this documentary is there's a huge dearth of black musicians, black bands, except for New Orleans.
Right.
You know, we found some great brass bands. But in terms of you go to New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, places that used to have just incredible scenes, there's no band.
The thing about our culture, our black culture, is that we're always like consumed with what's next, what's new. That's just been the way we are, you know. Really don't look back too much. Maybe it's because traditionally the past has been too painful. You know, I remember families, when I was growing up, there were families, you know, friends of mine whose parents wouldn't let them play the blues in their house. I don't want to hear that. That music ain't nothing but pain. You know what I mean? That music ain't nothing about suffering. I don't want to hear that in my house, you know. They didn't want to look back. It was always about the new thing. Like when we were kids, before you went to a party, man, you had to know the new dance, right? You had to have clothes that weren't played out. We used to call it play. Yo, that's play. You had to make sure you had the current clothes. Everything had to be current today, right? Which is what has caused us to innovate so many things, you know, dances and all these different styles because we're so consumed with that. The downside is that, you know, we lose some of our sense of history, you know. It's starting to change with hip-hop because so much of hip-hop is based on older music. It's starting to open the door for black culture.
But let me tell you this, man. When I go to like these clubs, there's Galactic from New Orleans,
Right.
Soul Live. These are white bands playing for young white audiences.
Yes.
They're playing.
Oh, it's always been that way. Like, you go to Chicago, man, for the last 50 years, go to the blues club, only black people in the club are on stage, right? Black people didn't want to have nothing to do with the blues, right? And white people are like, man, this is everything. This is American music here. You know, this is important. But we were like, you know, that's old. You know what I mean? And so when those drum machines started coming out, we were on it. Yo, this is the new stuff. Boom. Every song from 1983 to like 5 years ago had a drum machine on.
At 808.
808. I mean, and they developed new sound systems to accommodate these new drum machines that were creating these frequencies that are much lower than normal instruments play. You know what I mean? I mean, it changed everything. But consequently, man, what happened to drummers, man? I know drummers, man, who one year were working, in the 80s when these drum machines came out. I remember drummers who were working, man, every day for a bunch of different bands, and all of a sudden, man, within 2 years, they couldn't find a job. I mean, I know guys who it really messed them up because everybody jumped on this sound. And so first the drummers went, then the bass players went because everybody's using synth bass. And then, once the computers got sophisticated enough, you didn't really need any musicians. You know what I mean? You got to play a guitar sound on the keyboard, a bass down, the drums, everything. Pretty soon we're not even going to need singers. You know what I mean? They're going to figure out how to do that too. But the one thing that always saves you is the church, gospel church, right? That's where you can still find musicians because, nobody in church wants to see you press the space bar to make the music start. They want to see actual real people sweating. And it's starting to come back now because a lot of the artists are realizing that there's nothing like the energy that's created from a live band playing
Most of the larger hip hop artists now have a band.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it just makes a big difference. You feel it.
Energy-wise, you know what I mean? The DJ can wave his hands all he wants. But, man, when you got, 9 guys out there sweating, man, making it happen, it's a big difference.
Let me put another album into your, because this is a band that
Oh, man.
hold it up for the camera there.
Man, Earth, Wind, and Fire, Spirit.
What? Because now they're interesting in this discussion because they were very, very, very arranged, very jazz, and very Latin.
Yes. But at the core of this band, no matter what they piled on top, it was funky, And that's the thing that is really interesting because, in the 70s, there were 2 bands. I mean, there was a bunch of bands. But for this discussion, there were 2 bands. There was Parliament and there was Earth, Wind, and Fire, right? And Parliament, that's carried on in its own way, you know what I mean? In the black community because it was so obviously funky, right? That you could sample it, you could do all these things to it, and the music's lived on. Earth, Wind, and Fire, to me, was just as important in the 70s, but in the black community, they weren't sampled, and they weren't like preserved like Parliament was.
Why do you think that is?
Because there was too much on top that a lot of people couldn't recognize the funk underneath. They were preserved more on a pop level. So you always hear September. You know what I mean? You always hear their pop songs, which is cool. But to me, that's not like vintage Earth, Wind, and Fire. You know what I mean? To me, vintage Earth, Wind, and Fire was like serpentine fire. You know what I mean? Where the bass went. That's funky, but people couldn't hear how funky it was because they put so much. But they put all these great horns and all these vocals and all this bad stuff, and it made for a beautiful record. But I don't think people recognize how funky they are.
You know what's funky? You know what record? Ba-da-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba.
Yeah.
Ba-da-da-ba-ba. That was the one that was hip hop was sampled.
Yeah.
That's the one that got sampled hip hop.
Exactly.
First time I went to a rap show, I saw DJ Hollywood, and they played that over and over and over.
That song was created before sampling, but it sounds like it was meant to be sampled. You know what I mean? Because it started off with just finger snaps and the voices. So anybody who wanted to sample it could do it and put whatever beat under it they wanted. I love that song, man.
So do you think one time we talked about one time was that you went to a party and you met someone from the Republican Party who talked about funding music in schools.
I was at a party. Yeah, I was at a dinner party. And this was right at the beginning of the Ronald Reagan years, right? And I said something like, well, the only problem, for me, well, not the only problem, but a big problem with the Republican mentality is that they don't really feel like music in schools is a priority, And this person said, who was a Republican, she said, listen, if people want to make music, they'll find a way, whether they learn in school or not, right? And I was like, man, she was right. It turns out that she was right because what happened, man, right after my generation, they stopped giving music in schools, giving music lessons in schools. That didn't stop anybody from making music. It just changed the way they made music, They had guys in a couple of years younger than me who started taking records and spinning them like this and then stopping it and started again and making music with a turntable because that's the only instrument they had, right? And next thing you know, hip hop came out. So I was like, man, these Republicans were right, man. They created hip hop. You know what I mean?
But what are the musical? I mean, one of the arguments that I have though is, and actually a lot of the musicians we've interviewed say this: you can learn how to play by pressing a button, but can you create new music that way? I mean,
Here's
create
the
new
thing.
sounds. You know what I'm saying?
Here's the thing. As a musician, right? When I make music, I start from the notes. The kind of the smallest unit you can start with is a note. And I make music from the notes, right? And then I add this whole thing. People who don't play instruments, they make music by making collages, right? They take already existing music from here, already existing music from there, and they mix it together, and they make this collage, which has its own thing. Now, as a musician, we're like, dude, man, you started from level 5. You know what I mean? What happened to, you don't know how to make a note. You don't even know where the notes are on the instrument, But it's all about how you look at it. You know what I mean? I like making music from the ground up because I can start it from wherever I want and I can go whatever direction. I'm not held in by whatever records I can buy. You know what I mean? Because I use different tools.
Okay. Are there any musicians? Oh, where do you think the funk means now in the 21st century? Where is it a viable? How does it manifest itself in American and world musical culture, not just American?
Well, I think that I'm on the road, a lot these days, and I play jazz, but my kind of rhythmic underpinning of my jazz is funk music, And I'm telling you, I've been all over the world, man. In a couple of days, I'm going to be in Angola, Africa. You know what I mean? I'm going to be in France. I'm going to be in Japan. You know what I mean? I'm going to be all over, man. And when we hit that funk, it doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter if I can't even say hello in the language of the country that we're in. It doesn't matter. Once we hit that, whole crowd starts moving. You know what I mean? It's truly a universal language, man. It's truly something that brings people together. It breaks down barriers. You know what I mean? Then we add the jazz, we add improvisation, we add all this American stuff, because America is so much about individuality and improvisation, making stuff up. Jazz is truly an American music, and it's an American art form. You put the funk underneath it, and then you have Americans being Americans. Like we go to Japan, and they're looking at us, because, if you look at Japan, a lot of people dress similar, Even the people who are rebels, all the rebels dress the same. You know what I mean? It's like, it's a real uniform society, And we come there, man, each guy in the band has a different way he dresses, has a different way he moves, has a different style, you know what I mean? That's very American, very valuable, And funk was the same way, you know what I mean? It's very American. It's like, we took this African sense of rhythm, and we combined it with our American experience, man, with the blues. And we created this thing, man, that's like so powerful. It's so powerful. And no matter what people call it, they can call it electronica, they can call it house, they can call it funk, they can call it, what do they call it, man? Smooth jazz, whatever they call it, you know what I mean? The thing that gets you in it is that funk, Just take away the smooth piano, take away the jazz trumpet, take away whatever it is on top of the music, that's giving you kind of like this other flavor. And what do you got underneath? The funk.
Talk about Larry Graham.
Larry Graham was Sly's bass player when Sly first hit it, And, the first bass lines that Larry played, because he was trying to keep everybody dancing, so he played bass lines that went like... I call them like pumping bass lines, just... But later on, man, like a couple of years later, he started... Called here that went... And it was like a busy bass line, right? But it went... Pap, 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 pap. Woo! We were like, what? And then he sang, and his voice was as funky as his bass line. Larry Graham blew a lot of bass players' minds, including mine. And I said, I got to learn how to play like that. And I've been carrying that style throughout my whole career. I brought it more into a jazz area, you know what I mean, or R&B area, with Luther Vandross. I did bass line and went. right? But it's still funky, like kind of Larry Graham, but more in like an R&B flavor.
Right.
But he really revolutionized bass playing. Even Bootsy, who had started with James Brown, and Bootsy started, fingerstyle, but he was even adding a little thumping and plucking.
What is talking about the great? What did Bootsy bring to the party? What was his? What do you think his innovation in terms of funk?
Well, the first thing Bootsy did, in my opinion, was he kind of continued the James Brown tradition. So he had bass lines that way, which is fingerstyle, right? But then he started doing like more bubbly funk that went. Which is like bouncy and like what, and it's all off the beat, all very syncopated.
Right.
You know what I mean? That's what I'm saying, man. The words never do justice.
When I listen to Bootsy's bass lines, it's weird because it's kind of not. It's on another planet sometimes from the rest of the record.
It's really interesting because he was really hitting that one really hard when he was with James Brown. I'm sure James Brown was insisting on that.
He was.
But once he got on his own, he was dancing. He let the drums. If you ever notice on those records with Bootsy on the bass, the drummer kept it straight because Bootsy was dancing around and they needed that balance. A lot of things. A really important aspect of funk music is its African call and response feature. You know what I mean? You hear call and response all the time, and it sounds kind of like what they talk about, But it's everywhere in black music, If you go to church and the preacher says something, the deacon at least is going to say, preach it, brother, or amen. He's going to egg them on, right? You don't get that in like the Catholic Church. You're not allowed really to talk back to the preacher in the Catholic Church. But the African tradition is always, I say something, you respond, right? And in funk music, that call and response is there. Those parts that they sit around and practice for hours and hours until they get that funk groove to work perfectly is about working out that call and response. So you hear the drummer and the bass hit the one, boom, and you'll hear the horns hit the two, boom, bad, boom, boom, bad, boom, 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 bad, boom, boom, bad. Everything works like a little Swiss clock, right? I do this, you answer with that, and then I do this, you answer with that. When the funk doesn't work, it's because the musicians aren't listening and they're starting to play over each other. They're not answering each other. But when it works, man, you can sit with your headphones on and listen to the instruments talking to each other, man, And that takes you back. Where does that take you back to? That takes you back communication with rhythm, right? Without having to use words, right? Field slaves, you know what I mean? Not being able to talk, having to use their voice, having to use rhythm to communicate, Back in Africa, they had drums that could communicate things because we're a culture of rhythm. You know what I mean? Rhythm is so important. We can say so many things to each other just with the rhythm. I'll play something for you. A couple of bass lines I play, I can see your body moving. You know what I mean? Because that's the culture. You know what I mean? That call and response, man. I do something, you have to do something in return.
Well, Marcus, you answered all my damn questions.
Funk music, man. It's about time. It's about time, man.
You know what I want to do after this? I want to do this documentary. Then I want to do something. I want to do the history of black music without narration.
Yeah.
Just rhythm. Just rhythm. That's my. We're gonna do that together.
Yes.
We're gonna get back. We're gonna just no fucking explaining anything.
Yeah. Because oh man, it's so important, man. And when you try to explain it to somebody who doesn't come up in that culture, you know what I mean? Guy asked me, I was at Berklee College of Music doing like a seminar or something. The guy raised his hand and he said, do you think there's a difference between black musicians and white musicians? I go, well, yeah, but not because of the melanin content in their skin. It's just cultural. I said, like I said to you earlier, I said, the black culture is so rhythmic. I mean, you're taught to dance at a really early age. Dancing is so much a part of your family culture. You see your parents dancing all the time.
I
you know?
danced. I was a Jackie Wilson imitator,
Yeah.
so I had to do the Jackie Wilson.
I was chubby checker. I had to do the twist
Right.
for my parents.
Right.
Every black kid had to dance for their aunts and uncles
Yep.
at a party.
Yep.
You know what I mean? As we got older, we had to know the latest dance in order to party. You know what I mean? We had to, when we got spankings, I thought I told. Even that was in rhythm. You know what I mean? Rhythm was everywhere, man, and it's just so much of a part of the culture. So if you take somebody who's not from that culture and you start teaching them about funk music or swinging when they're 18, 19 years old, it's too late. It's like learning like French at 18, 19 years old. You know, you're going to have an accent. It's not going to be like the authentic thing. So, you know, take a white kid, put him in that environment from birth, provided he's musically talented, right? And it's a good chance he's gonna come up kind of funky too. You know what I mean? So it's just a culture, you know. Man, what's the funkiest bass line ever?
Funky bass line ever.
No, that's not fair.
Yeah.
What's okay?
You know what's the big one? Skin. Is that Skin Tight?
And the number two. I heard there was some cross-pollination between Funkadelic and Ohio Plays. Is that true?
Well, Junie was in both.
Junie.
Was in
He's
both.
the
Yeah.
kind of the connection.
Also,
right?
it's all the Midwest. We went to Dayton.
Yeah, see,
You know how
that's
many
like,
bands are from Dayton?
Yeah, that's the home of the funk.
It's the home of the funk.
It's the home of the funk.
There are like 8 bands from Dayton, and not only we found out that's the bands, writers like some of the guys who work for the Whisperers. Dick Griffey went to Dayton, L.A. and Babyface,
Really?
the Shelby Brothers.
Really?
Who wrote, he just scooped up a bunch of them. Because then he got Lakeside. They're all from Dayton. And then you go up Dayton, Cincinnati,
Right.
which is
Right.
King Records, which is Bootsy.
Yeah. Right.
Chicago, where the Ohio Players did most of the records.
But see, that's the same path, Nelson, of the blues,
Yes.
right? Because the funk is really the blues, just with another rhythmic twist to it.
Right.
You know what I mean? But the scale that you use when you play funk is the blues, right? You have to go. That's the blues, right? It's just rhythmically just a little straighter. You know what I mean?
Right.
And sometimes it's not even that different.
Well, you know, something that came up a lot was we talked to Diamond, the drummer from the Ohio Players. He talked about space.
Yeah.
That literally, he did something on his hands. It was amazing. He did a whole rhythm about like this. Then he changed it and did the same funk rhythm.
Right.
And it's all about. He said the space between. It came up a few times. The space between the notes.
Yeah, exactly. The space between the notes, and then when you do play the note, where you place it. You know what I mean? Like, you'll have somebody and you write out the funk for them. Because I was a studio musician for like 20 years, man. And I would see some arranger write out a funky line for a guitar player who wasn't from the funk culture. You know what I mean? He played the notes exactly right.
Huh.
But it wasn't right. You know, it wasn't the same thing, man. And then I sit there, man, next to Catfish, Bootsy's brother.
Right.
When he was doing his thing, I sat next to him, man, and said, okay, that's it, you know.
He is Bootsy's idol. Now, all Bootsy wanted to be Catfish.
Catfish is funky, man. He was funky, you know. And the reason I'm glad you're doing this is because we fought so hard, Nelson. We fought so hard as black musicians for respect. And I was saying this earlier, that a lot of times we denied our blackness to get that respect. You know what I mean? We didn't want to be too funky. We didn't want to be too bluesy. We didn't want to be too earthy. You know what I mean? Because we wanted to be regarded in the same way whites were regarded, you know? But now I'm traveling the world and seeing that the thing that people all around the world admire us for is our ability to connect that to the earth, our ability to do what we do, our ability to do what a lot of us have tried to distance ourselves from, you know?
Go to Brazil, ballet funk, and Afrobeat.
Yeah.
And all these different forms of music around the world, inspired by a foundation from here,
Yes.
with the local flavor.
Right. Yeah, like it's crazy. Like we come from Africa through South America, into the Caribbean, into America, right? What we're doing here now is going back the other way and influencing everybody down the line, you know? Everybody down the line. You'll hear different versions of funk with all these different little kind of, depending on the area, the different little like nuances that they add from their own culture, you know? It's really powerful.
So you go to any band that you've heard around the world. I know you go all over the place. That you really like that's in a funk mode that I should look up.
You know, you know, the one that I like, man, that he's funky and like R&B, man. This dude from what's that dude? The English dude, man. You know who I'm talking about? The singer, man. Sounds like Marvin Gaye.
Is this a new guy?
No, man, he's not that new, but he's been around for a long time. His name is
Black, white, British.
white British guy.
That's a lot of. That could be a lot of.
Wait, what's the dude's name, man? Real like kind of.
Not Jamiroquai. No, not Jamiroquai.
Not Jamiroquai. This guy is like really reclusive, and nobody can get him to come out of hiding. You know what I mean? And he just made a couple of records. He sounds just like Marvin Gaye, man. You know.
I think of Joe Cocker, not Joe Cocker.
And younger, younger
Right.
than Joe Cocker, like 20 years
Morrison?
younger.
No. Not that.
No, yeah, way after. I'll get you his name in his.
Paul Young.
Right after Paul Young, and more soulful than Paul Young.
No.
He plays all the instruments himself. Lewis.
I don't know.
Unsleep this computer for a second.
You're killing me, man.
This guy's bad, man. Wait.
Little Lewis? No.
No, what's the dude's name? Lewis.
I'm going through my white soul singers thing, man.
You don't know this cat, man? He's like really reclusive.
He's so reclusive. I missed him.
He recluded himself right out of your consciousness. Lewis Porter?
Louis Porter? Never heard of him.
No, that's not it. No, that's not it. Who would know?
Yeah, we can cut, guys.
I'll figure it out.
Yeah.